in association with Jaqua lighting, inspired by the sun, moon and stars.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Archit Tashadri. Thanks so much for joining us. You're watching Gravitas on WION World is One News. It is Friday, June the 16th. The time is now 11:30 in New York, 4:30 p.m. in London, 5:30 p.m. in Cairo, and 9 p.m. here in New Delhi. Tonight, our focus is on global terrorism, times of terror. You've heard about the groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban. Well, we start with what happens when the U.S. puts an individual like this one on an individual terror watch list. What are the implications? Is it just a no-fly zone? What about the bounty? And how does someone actually make it into that list? And what groups are actually part of it? Later on Gravitas, we take a look at the safety of foreign journalists after more than a dozen are killed in the line of duty every single year, and most of them are in Afghanistan, these terror hotspots. Lastly, we'll explore terror in Africa, including groups like Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab. Lots on the discussion for tonight on Gravitas, but first a look at the stories making headlines around the world. Germany and Austria jointly criticized the American bill seeking sanctions against Russia and say they could affect European businesses involved in piping Russian natural gas. In India, the BJP initiates a discussion over the presidential polls. Party members meet Congress President Sonia Gandhi to discuss the candidates. And a special court announces the judgment for the 1993 Mumbai blast case as Abu Saleh Mustafa Dosa, who's convicted, along with 4 others. All right, some big news when it comes to fighting global terrorism. Russia says that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of Daesh or the so-called Islamic State, may be dead. This claim comes 4 years after Baghdadi declared a caliphate straddling Iraq and Syria. Ramesh Ramachandran reports.
The Russian Defense Ministry on Friday said that Baghdadi may have been killed in a Russian airstrike last month. The airstrike carried out on 28th May allegedly targeted a meeting of IS leaders just outside the group's de facto capital of Raqqa in Syria. The Russian Defense Ministry released satellite images of the location to buttress its claim. One photo clicked on 13th May shows the location before the airstrike, and the other, taken on 29th May, the day after the reported airstrike, shows 4 buildings in the neighborhood completely leveled. Russia claims Baghdadi and his commanders had used those buildings for their meeting on the day of the airstrike. The spokesperson for the US-led anti-IS coalition said in a statement on Friday that they could not confirm the Russian claim. It is not the first time Baghdadi has been reported dead. Similar reports had surfaced last year. But in November, the IS released a video of Baghdadi urging his followers to keep up the fight for Mosul in Iraq. His group has suffered a series of setbacks in recent months. The Daesh or the IS is on the retreat in Iraq and now in Syria, where it has been reduced to controlling a small swathe of land around Raqqa. Bureau Report, WION.
Well, joining us tonight on Gravitas to discuss this story, we have former intelligence officer Glenn Carl from Massachusetts in the United States. We also have a senior intelligence officer right here in New Delhi, J.K. Verma. Thank you both for joining us. Let's start with this story. We'll start with Glenn first. How significant is this that Russia claims that Baghdadi may be dead, especially to ISIS?
Well, it might, if it proves true, it might be one of the first substantially, significantly good things that Russia has done in Syria. Their involvement otherwise has not been very constructive. The death of Al-Baghdadi would be consequential because his charisma, intelligence, leadership has been central to the evolution, development of the so-called Islamic State. So his death would be consequential. The United States has long experience, and I think most countries do, with killing chiefs of operations and number twos and so on, and institutions are stronger than individuals most of the time. In this instance, I think it would be a turning point, but the Islamic State is in its last phase here. It has been for some time.
All right, let's go to J.K. Verma. Interesting perspective there. It also draws a lot of similarities when you talk about Osama bin Laden, and what happened when the U.S. was able to capture him. Mr. Verma, if this is indeed true, these reports that Russia claims that al-Baghdadi is no more, how significant of a blow is that for ISIS?
Honestly speaking, there are several times this type of information came that Baghdadi was killed. This is understandable because if this fact comes that the Baghdadi killed, this weakens Daesh. So this type of information can be this information can also be by the US-led forces. On the other hand, it may be possible that the Baghdadi might really be killed, but the IS people, they do not want to leak it, because if they mention that the Baghdadi is killed, so that will make a Daesh weak. So in this way, this is, unless something concrete comes up, so you cannot say with confirmation that Baghdadi is killed. Both sides may like to say that he is killed, while the Daesh may like to say that he is not killed. So there must be a clear-cut proof, a conclusive evidence that Baghdadi is killed. But there is no doubt that by the bombardment or the bombing made by US-led forces as well as by Russia, of course, with different reasons,
right,
with the diverse intentions, the IS is becoming weak in Syria as well as in Iraq.
Mr. Verma, I also wanted to have a follow-up question
please.
to you with regard to that. In terms of if Russia's claims are indeed true that al-Baghdadi is no more, how significant of a blow could that be to ISIS? I mean, could this perhaps mean that they're already looking for yet another leader? I mean, we've seen so many terror attacks in recent months, a lot of them in Europe, and a lot of the times we hear groups like ISIS quickly jump in and say ISIS claims responsibility. So if this news is indeed true, could this perhaps signify the birth of a new ISIS leader?
Yeah, in fact, if Baghdadi goes or Baghdadi kills, this is confirmed, then somebody will certainly take his place. But the Baghdadi is really a charismatic leader, although he started his career as a low-level person, but very soon he took the advantage of Shia-Sunni rift and other places, and also declared by declaring an Islamic state or Islamic Caliphate.
Right.
He has gained the importance in all the terrorist organizations. So this is one thing, that if he is killed, it is proved, then somebody will certainly take over, but the impact will be certainly less. Here, I will also like to point out one point, that as IS is realizing that its hold in Iraq and Syria is dwindling, that's why they want to shift their headquarters from Iraq or from Syria to some other place. That may be Afghanistan, Pakistan, or maybe Bangladesh. So we have to be careful for this point. Secondly, the other important point is that as Baghdadi is feeling that IS is losing ground, they are creating more and more lone wolves, and which will be a very great danger to the whole mankind. And as they have put lot many literature against Western powers,
right,
against democracy and pro-jihadi literature, so slowly and slowly lone wolves are created, and which will be a big danger, and the democratic countries should always be careful about it.
All right, we'll have to wait and watch to see what exactly happens, but let's provide some clarity and perspective about who exactly is Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Well, for starters, that's not even his real name. He's actually believed to be named as Ibrahim al-Samarai. Well, the Islamic State has carried out some of the worst atrocities in the name of the religion of Islam. Now, these have been carried out in many places around the world, including Iraq, Syria, Libya, and other places. The Islamic State justifies extreme violence and cruelty as necessary to terrorize its enemies and impress new recruits. The Islamic State, ISIS, believes in total war without any constraints. All right, so let me go back to Glenn Carl standing by. Glenn, you know, I wanted to follow up with you about terror funding. We always talk about terror groups like ISIS, Al-Baghdadi specifically, but there are these lone wolf, these copycat attackers who perhaps get inspired by groups like ISIS and by, what they're able to accomplish. What exactly, or who exactly rather, is perhaps funding these other recruits, these offshoots of ISIS?
Well, terrorist finance is one of the central issues and ways that intelligence services can go after the terrorist organizations and individuals. It's something I've worked on a long time. And so the announcement, notification that these 4 individuals have been put on a terrorist watch list by the U.S. is part of the daily work of intelligence services in the United States, but it's significant. Unfortunately, terrorism is a low-cost industry. It doesn't cost a lot of money to blow something up or to kill somebody. All you have to have is a kitchen knife, and sadly, almost anybody can make a bomb. So although following the money is important, and we can seriously harm a structured organization like Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State, terrorism as it has evolved in the last decade and into these individual actors, the lone wolves, as our colleague termed them, is really the phenomenon. And that doesn't take much that we have to confront now, and that doesn't take much money. However, following the money remains critical because you can't have much of a structure if you can't pay for anything.
All right, well, speaking of that, this exactly lends well into our next discussion tonight, which certainly talks about the U.S. The U.S. State Department, in fact, has now named 3 key ISIS operatives, including one right here in India, an Indian recruiter, to its specifically designated global terrorists list. The State Department has named Mohammed Shafi Armar Osama, Ahmed Attar, as well as Mohammed Isa Yusuf Sakar al-Banali on its terror list. Now, this list imposes strict sanctions as well as bars U.S. nationals from having any type of dialogue or talks with these men. Armar is a native of Karnataka. He's said to have recruited at least 30 men for ISIS in India, according to Indian intelligence agencies. The State Department termed Armar as a leader and head recruiter in India for ISIS. He's also accused of radicalizing Muslim youth, conspiring to carry out terror strikes in New Delhi, as well as assembling explosive devices. Let me go back to Mr. Verma joining us in New Delhi. The fact that we have an Indian on this list, what are those implications, the bounty? What exactly does that mean? Do people have something to worry about right here in India? What exactly does being on a terror watch list entail? Mr. Verma.
Yeah. Mohammed Shafi Armar is in fact belongs to Karnataka, and from the place where there were previously also the terrorists. In fact, his elder brother was the founder member of Mujahideen, Islamic Mujahideen, Indian Mujahideen. So, and he is a technical person who knows the internet well. So he has put lot many literature, and he is creating differences between the two communities, and he is the main recruiter for the IS. There are reports that he had gone to Karachi and took training from there. His elder brother was killed while fighting for IS in the Middle East. There are also reports that he is able to recruit so many disenchanted Muslims in India. Although India being the second largest Muslim population, there are very less people, Muslims who have joined it. But still, one has to be very careful. Secondly, Mr. Shafi has also got education from Nadwa College, Muslim College, Nadwa from Lucknow.
Right.
And Nadwa is one very few Islamic institutions who have recommended, who has said something favorable for IS. So now the time has come when the intelligence agencies should create a special cell for IS, and in that special cell the intelligence officers should be well savvy, well acquainted with the internet and social media, because Shafi is recruiting people. Shafi and people like him are recruiting through media, through internet and social media.
All right, let me go over to Glenn Carr really quickly. You know, we talked about social media there from Mr. Verma. He brought up a good point about how social media, this whole world of an online space, really makes it easier for terror groups like ISIS to perhaps carry out its recruits, as well as those who perhaps are believing in this ideology to spread their message. The fact that now there is an Indian on that list of global terrorists, and especially with the world of online technology, how easy is that for such terrorists to perhaps spread their message to gain more recruiters, Glenn?
Well, this is the phenomenon that we have to struggle with now. I mean, the American effort by Trump to make the borders and immigration stiffer are in a way, are looking backwards, because you can't, unless you become the hermit kingdom of North Korea and stop all internet traffic or any traffic communication with the outside world. The threat is the mind and ideas and the media, not classically a recruiter,
right,
an individual saying, well, listen, do this. So it is a terrible problem. The case of Ammar, I think, raises most of the central challenges that my colleague who's just been speaking and I before and intelligence services must deal with regard to terrorism. One, you have terrorist financing as the key, but the Hawala system, the United States and India, I'm sure, are good at following actual bank transactions, and banks conform to the laws and support on the whole, overall, counterterrorism measures for law enforcement. However, Hawala is an individual, and there are no records really that one can access as a system, as a government system. And the money is among a small circle of known people, so it's quite secure that when it trains its hands. So you have that. You have the school, the madrasa in Lucknow, where this fellow became radicalized.
Right.
And there are several schools that are critical in India, in Indonesia, in Saudi Arabia, almost all with Saudi money, that are the nodes where this problem occurs. So you have money laundering through or transfers through Hawala system. You have an Indian as opposed to somebody from the Gulf. You have the school that is radicalizing. It's all right there. So it's an important case, and we can see from it the ways that intelligence services and law enforcement officials need to go about trying to stop them.
All right, certainly makes for a very deadly combination there, the ways that terrorists can simply spread at the click of a button. Well, let's get back to this specific case in India. What does the designation of Mohammed Shafi al-Ammar by the U.S. actually mean? Well, let's first examine what the Department of State has charged Ammar with. Ammar is also known as Yusuf al-Hindi. The U.S. State Department notification, the State Department named him a specifically designated global terrorist. The The notification said he had formed several Islamic State-affiliated groups right here in India. It also named Junud al-Khalifa-i-Hind as one of them. The notification said at least 50 Indian youth had been recruited to the cause of the Islamic State. All right, let's go back to Mr. Verma there with regards to this. Quite a few surprising measures there that's come out from that U.S. State Department. The U.S. State Department certainly has a lot on its hands, but when it comes to that, for the average citizen, for people like me and you and everybody else, what is this designation? Do we have something to be afraid of? Do we have something to worry about when we fly? The bounty. I mean, what exactly does the average citizen have to worry about after this list has now come out? Mr. Verma?
Yeah, in fact, by declaring him a global terrorist, we have to understand one thing, that he is the first Indian who was declared global terrorist by United States. In fact, it is a very bad sign for the country, because so far no Indian was declared as a global terrorist. So that's why we have to be careful, and we must be more careful that radicalization should be stopped, one, and the people who are radicalized, efforts should be made to de-radicalize them. Besides that, we also have to see that if few madrasas, they are creating rift and they want to disturb the secular fabric of the country, they should also be taken care of. Coming back to your point, in fact, now there will be more sanctions for the individual. I cannot say what exactly it will mean for him, because he may not be going to USA. But of course, there will be sanctions for him, and economic sanctions for him, and he will be more wanted, and more effort will be made to catch him dead or alive.
All right, let me go over to Glenn Carr. Glenn, the State Department often makes these lists that keeps tracks of terror groups like ISIS, not only, of course, in certain hotspots, but now even India has made it to that list. What type of impact is that, especially with U.S. and India relations? I mean, typically, India never really was part of that group, but now, unfortunately, it has got its name on that list. What does this mean?
Oh, I don't think that it will harm U.S.-Indian relations at all. I think, if anything, it would be part of the cooperation that I know exists between India and the United States and other countries, and India and other countries too, in counterterrorism actions. I've always been a little interested with these lists, because the work of intelligence services, law enforcement officials, the State Department, so on, will continue, and we don't particularly want to publicize generally the people who we are trying to get. Now, we'll work with India or with Pakistan or whomever to try to have extraditions of people who we consider terrorists, and vice versa. So that will happen. It will make life harder for this individual now, because wherever he is, if he shows his head, he is a wanted man. That would be a consequence, but that was probably true prior to the publication of this. So in a way, to me, it shows the ongoing work and coordination and cooperation of intelligence services, but it won't harm, that I see, Indian-U.S. relations. As Mr. Verma pointed out, the fact that there is an Indian Muslim now internationally recognized as a global terrorist is a disturbing point, and no one would like to have that happen. But every country, unfortunately, has to deal with some individuals like this.
All right, let's actually take a look now at what exactly the State Department designation actually means. Well, it means that he's alive. His identity has been confirmed. It also gives credence to reports about his proximity to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the elusive head of the Islamic State that we talked about earlier in the newscast. It comes about a year after India approached the U.S. and the United Nations demanding that Ammar be designated as a global terrorist. In fact, the first time the U.S. has sanctioned a terrorist leader from India. By designating him as a global terrorist, the U.S. is now acknowledging that he does pose a risk to the country as well as U.S. nationals. In this sanctioning, Ammar His name now moves to the U.S. Office of Foreign Assets Control. This office controls the application of sanctions against terrorists and countries that harbor them. The sanctions could be comprehensive or selective. It can also block assets and restrict trade with countries backing terrorism. Interpol also monitors Ammar's movements. All of that applies. Well, in fact, over the last 2 decades, the U.S. State Department has listed many foreign terrorist organizations. The Bureau of Counterterrorism monitors the activities of terror groups, including planning and preparation of such attacks, including the South Asian groups, mostly operating out of Pakistan, in fact, such as the Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, as well as several others. In fact, Al-Qaeda was sanctioned back in 1999 and the notorious Haqqani network in 2012. All right, so let me go back to our discussion with our guests. Let's go to Glenn Carl. The fact that the U.S. has this list, it looks at it, it keeps track, it monitors that. There's many groups, in fact, that's been coming in and out, in and out. Glenn, you know, when it comes to monitoring those lists, for example, let me bring up the example of what happened in the UK, the London terror attack. I mean, those terrorists were on the watch list. They were on that list, but clearly that didn't stop those terrorists from doing what they did. They went on a stabbing spree and they attacked innocent civilians. So the fact that the U.S. State Department has this list keeps a track of so many different groups, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, ISIS, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, so many groups. I mean, how effective is that in thwarting terror attacks, potential attacks? Because there's so many of them there. I mean, there's only so much that they can actually do.
Well, there are limits to, you can't have an agent behind every individual 24 hours in the world, 24 hours a day, and not to be foolish about it. But the fact that an individual is on a list is one of the tools. It makes it much harder for the individual to travel from country to country or even within the country, or to have in his name or any identifiable name, a phone number, a phone, a bank account, anything like this. It triggers requests for extradition, coordination between Mr. Ammar and I and his service and mine when I was working. So it makes life a lot harder. Now, the fact that the individuals in London, as frequently proves to be the case, had already been noticed by the British and the Americans or whomever, frequently is the case. The problem always is that you can't lock someone up who has not committed a crime. And so to know when an individual will become operational and commit an act is the critical question and the hardest one to answer. We meaning intelligence law enforcement officials, were unable to answer it in the Paris attack, the Brussels attack, the Rome attack a decade ago, this London attack, and on and on. We'll know about people, but it's hard to know what snaps that instant and makes them go operational. But putting them on the list will make it that much harder. The intelligence services are quite effective overall in tracking, identifying, and stopping these people, but not perfect.
All right. In fact, let's take a look really quickly at the last 2 decades. In fact, what the U.S. State Department has done in classifying terror groups. Well, 20 years ago, in fact, back in 1997, Hamas and Hezbollah, they made it to that list. 1999, Al-Qaeda joined that watch list. Fast forward to 2001, Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba also made it to that list. Then, in 2004, we're all too familiar with this one, ISIL or ISIS or Daesh on that list. Then in 2008, making its presence felt in Africa, Al-Shabaab. In 2011, the Indian Mujahideen. In 2012, the Haqqani network in Pakistan. And 2013, Boko Haram in Africa. So those were some of the groups that the U.S. State Department was able to categorize and pinpoint about potential attacks before they were actually executed. Really quickly, I want to go to Mr. Varma. Before we wrap this up, we have, in fact, a question from a live Facebook viewer. Ashish, I want to read out that question to you. Mr. Varma, the question is, should the United Nations be doing more? Should the UN have taken more of a stand in some of these groups in thwarting these attacks to do what they can to, perhaps end this reign of terror? We've seen so much. And is the UN just not doing enough to stop these attacks from happening? Your thoughts?
In fact, everybody talks about the so many problems and about the Islamic State and several terrorist groups. But if we analyze honestly, we will find that all the countries are working with a diverse interest. They are not doing a joint effort to crush, curb or finish IS. Russians are bombarding the areas of IS in Iraq and Syria. US-led forces are doing it, but of course both are doing it with different intentions. Otherwise, no country want to send their troops on the ground. There is a urgent necessity to liberate all the areas which are under control of IS. For example, some time back, Turkey has bombarded the area of Kurdish,
right,
and not of IS areas, because they want, because there are some minority, Kurdish minority in Turkey, as well as in Iran. So they do not want to give all type of assistance to Kurdish fighters. In fact, the time has come when all the countries should work together. Then only the menace of IS will end. And as you very rightly pointed out, that after one, another, and another terrorist organizations are being produced or created because of few interests. For example, India's western neighbor, Pakistan, they always create, they have made a policy, of helping the terrorists, and they are creating terrorist activities not only in India, in Afghanistan, but in several other countries. And if we minutely observe, we will find that anywhere in the world, if any terrorist activity happens, some type of other, its linkage comes with Pakistan. For example, either the person may be a Pakistani, he may be a Pakistani origin of person, or he has taken some time training in Pakistan. So all the countries, democratic world should stand against those countries also which are helping the terrorism. Same way, in some Middle Eastern countries, they are also assisting the spread of Salafi and Wahhabi ideology, and which are against the democracy.
All right, really quickly as we wrap this up, we like to call this the three final words. We're going to go to Glenn Carl. 3 final words to wrap up this discussion. Glenn, we'll start with you.
Terrorist finance is important. I think the designation is a good sign. Amar's days are probably numbered.
All right, and Mr. Verma, wrap up with you. 3 final words to sum up this discussion.
The final words are that all the powers should fight together against the terrorism. Then only the world will be removed from the terrorism.
All right, we appreciate both of your inputs, J.K. Verma from New Delhi as well as Glenn Carl from the United States. Thank you so much for your inputs and perspectives. Well, that wraps up this segment on Gravitas, but we continue the conversation, Times of Terror, on the other side, where we take a look at the safety of journalists in terror hotspots. Plus, a little bit later on, we take a look at groups like Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram in Africa. We'll be right back.